We have a special guest with us tonight. I'd like to introduce the world's leading middleweight contender, the Bronx Bull, the Raging Bull. Let's hear it for the great Jake LaMotta, ladies and gentlemen.
I come from the Bronx, and even as a kid, which I was when he really was in his prime, Jake LaMotta was a legend. A lot of the boxers were, of course, in those days. And Jake LaMotta was one of our own, and he was a New York boy, a Bronx boy, and certainly we all identified with him on some level.
Bob Charnoff and I produced New York, New York, and while we were in the throes of that production, I constantly saw Bob De Niro walking around with this shop-worn looking book. And he never told me what it was, but he always carried it around. And one day he came over to me and he said, I'd like you to take a look at this book. And I looked at it, and it was the book on which Raging Bull ultimately was based.
I read the book when I was doing 1900 and in Italy, and I called Marty about it, and I said, you know, this book is not so well written, but it's got some heart to it. There's something interesting about the story. So then he got a copy and read it.
I was at Warner Brothers Studio finishing or about to make Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, 1974, I think. And so he gave me the book then and talked about dreaming of doing this character. And at that time he had in his mind to actually go through the physical transformation. And at that point we had just come off Mean Streets. We hadn't planned to make that many films together, Bob and I. It just turned out that way. We seemed to relate to the same material. So I read it, and I saw certainly the connection right away. I saw that, you know, I understood immediately the character. To a certain extent, I understood what he was interested in the character. And I like characters like that. It had that resonance for me as the kind of character that I would like to see and like to spend time with in a picture, you know, and like to make. So from that point on, he kept checking in with me, and I kept going off in different directions. And one of them was Taxi Driver. And then we did New York, New York together, and he was still being serious about Raging Bull. But by that point, I was changing my mind, though. I was no longer really interested. See, I never really understood sports, baseball, football, boxing. I like music more. And so by the time I was finishing New York, New York, I was working on The Last Waltz with Robbie Robertson. And in any event, we never quite settled on what it was, how we were going to approach the project, really. And in effect, we had started to work on a script with Martic Martin, who was a friend of mine who I met at New York University back in the early 60s. And we had worked on Mean Streets together.
So they gave me the book as a project to start with. Obviously, I had to start researching this, and that took almost 6 months. And Bob was with me, I'd say 50% of the time, meaning we sat through every boxing movie ever made and see how we could improve our project so we don't repeat the cliches. And that wasn't enough. So we decided to meet everybody who was involved in the story of Jake LaMotta, his ups and downs and his marriage and all that. So one of the first things we did was we flew to Miami, and I spent, I think, 3 or 4 days living with Vicky LaMotta and getting her to relax and tell me this marvelous, marvelous, realistic story. Nothing major in terms of story turns and events, but a lot of observations that I thought were wonderfully human.
And we spent a lot of time with Jake and going over it, and what do you think about this scene, and you know, and he was at the auditions with the fighters, especially at the gym. He would come down to the gym all the time when I would work out. He and his brother Joey, so they were always, Jake was a big part of it, and Pete Savage, who was the writer of the book, or one of the writers. And Pete would be around, a big part of it. Pete was, you know, very instrumental in sort of helping move the thing along, and he became one of the producers with Irwin Winkler and Bob Charnoff.
When I finished my research, Bob decided that he wanted to try some of these dialogue in a play. So I actually sat down and I wrote a first act. I've never written a play before, But I thought, what's the big deal?
I always wanted to try and do a play and a movie of the same piece simultaneously, but it can be done. It would have been a little hard. So we somehow dropped that after a while.
Well, what happened after, almost 2 years of working on a project
trailers.
and
Visita mi canal.
done so many versions, said, maybe I should really move on. I'm getting too close.
I didn't think I was going to make the film, quite honestly. I was going off in my own direction, and I had my own issues with the work I was doing and my own kind of work, and I was going through my own sort of crisis. And so it reached a point where it really came down to De Niro's insistence on doing it. How should I say insistence? More than insistence, it was his persuasion. He was really interested in doing it, and ultimately that led to us asking Paul Schrader to come in and approach the project from an objective point of view.
I read the script, and I knew there was something missing. I didn't know what. And I knew I had to do a lot of research. So I hired a researcher who worked for Rolling Stone, Stu Urban. And then we met up in Florida, and he started giving me the research. And I discovered that there were, in fact, two fighting LaMotta brothers. They were fighters together. They sometimes shared the bill together. And that Joey had the gift of gab and was personable, and Jake was socially really quite awkward. And they made a kind of de facto deal among themselves, which is essentially Joey would manage Jake and get the girls. Jake would get the beatings, and then they split the money.
We talked about them. Then he said, well, the next big change, he said, would be that you combine the Peter Savage character with the Joey LaMotta character, the brother. These are characters. These are based on real people. It's not the real people. It's a creation that comes out of everybody. But it was dramatically efficient to combine the two characters into one and make it the brother, make it bound by blood.
That eliminated a certain problem and created others, because now you had two brothers and you had certain things to get in, certain facts, certain things that didn't make sense if it's two brothers as opposed to a friend, but it all, anyway, we worked it out.
Once I had my sibling structure, having an older brother sibling, I knew how to play that. Now you're back into classic storytelling, you're back east of Eden. And you just start working all the elements that are involved with a two-brother story.
I'm a jerk? Yeah. You're a fucking asshole. Hey, what the fucking...
And we were sort of given freedom to move into Jake's life. And you knew that certain things were happening. There was a family configuration, and beyond that, you were able to fill the glass up with your own fluids. It wasn't a matter of saying, Jake, well, what happened in April? No, it was just a matter of using your imagination and your experience to fill it up.
And we would talk to Jake, say, what do you think about this? Jake would say, yeah, you could do, But we were kind of like, took it as far as we could, as far as what we thought it would be, and we make it our own, as you say, and then that's the most you can do.
When Schrader came in and gave us the new structure, I got very excited because I saw how he was able to cut right into the center of the story and begin it in a way, rather than going from the beginning and doing a linear story in a way. And so it freed us. And I saw certain things that Schrader liked in it that Bob had issues with. There was a couple of things he just didn't agree with, totally did not agree with. I thought it was interesting because it was kind of provocative.
I wrote a monologue about Jake at the bottom in a cell in solitary. And he's trying to masturbate. And in order to get himself aroused, he conjures up the memories of girlfriends, wives. And sure enough, at the point where he's aroused, it can possibly get some release, the memory turns to crap, and he realizes what a shit he was. And he has to give up that particular fantasy, move on to the next one, start all over again. And I think there was maybe 3 attempts. And finally, after the 3rd attempt, he gets so frustrated that he blames it on his hands. He always felt his hands were too small. And smashes his hands against the wall and breaks his knuckles.
I thought it was much more interesting than what we had before, but it still didn't fit around what De Niro saw as the character. So I asked Paul to try to convince Bob on that, see if they could come to a meeting of the minds. If they can't, then I got to really think about it too and see what the hell I was going to do.
Marty called me up and said Bob doesn't want to do it. And I said, why not? I said, it's really, really cool scene. It's a long three-page monologue. It's really actor's treat.
I do remember the masturbation thing, but I don't know where Paul got that, but I don't, that had nothing to do with what I remember. Anything about Jake or anything that Marty and I really felt was what the movie, what we were trying to do.
As it all turned out, it ended up being the I am not an animal sequence instead.
It's gonna be an animal. I'm not an animal. I'm not an animal. Oh, you want to treat me like this?
And then there was so much talk about the changing the script, and there was a meeting at the Sherry Netherland where I exploded at Bob and threw the script at him. But, we had an argument. I came back and I worked some more, but it became clear to Bob and Marty that this next final stage they were headed toward was the one that only they could get to. And so when Marty shot it, I sent him a telegram to clarify this, and essentially said, Jake did it his way and I did it my way. Now you do it your way, so that he wouldn't feel that he was somehow upsetting me by changing the script.
In any event, I still hadn't found my connection to the material. I was also in a very destructive state, and I wasn't satisfied with the work I was doing on New York, New York, and a couple of other things, and I felt I was losing something from the passion that produced Taxi Driver. And I certainly was losing connection with the passion that produced Mean Streets. And that was my concern, my fear. Could I ever feel strongly about something again? And it went back and forth, And so it reached a point where, I think it was September of '78, I was hospitalized. I felt like, I'd sort of somehow hit a certain bottom in a way, in many different ways. I was just in this room for like 10 or 12 days. I didn't go out of the room. I just felt that whatever I was railing against had run its course in a way. And now I wake up and I'm still there. So now what am I going to do? And when De Niro came to visit me, a number of people came, and De Niro pointed out he just was very concerned, because he said, look, you'd be so great at this material, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as he was speaking, I said, okay. But I still wasn't quite sure I wanted to make it. I really didn't know that world. I mean, I knew the world around it, but I didn't know the ring. I didn't understand what the ring was and is. I mean, I couldn't interpret it for my life. But I think at that time, of course, I was taking it too literally.
Y tus trailers. Visita mi
Because
canal.
ultimately I came to understand that the ring is everywhere. And it depends how much of a fighter you are in life. And the hardest opponent in the ring that you have is yourself. And that's what I understood but didn't articulate ultimately with anyone, really, when we were making the film. And basically what had happened, I think, was that I was disappointed in myself, disappointed in things I'd done. And I had to pull myself back together. You're either going to say sorry for yourself or you're going to get going. And with this material, having had his persuasion over a period of 6 years, let's say, of constantly coming back with it, look at it, think about it, look at it, think about it. And I started to connect with the material and certainly with the character. I mean, I only kind of realized it years later, but I kind of found myself in there somewhere, and felt the passion that I felt for Mean Streets, let's say. It suddenly started to pick up, particularly when De Niro requested that both of us go away.
We went to St. Martin after Schrader had written his final version. We went down and just reworked it.
So we came back to New York, and we brought the script back to Irwin Winkler, and he was pleased with it. And Irwin could tell you the rest. He knows all the details of the business, how we almost got the film made, how we didn't get it made.
One of the successes Charter Winkler had at that point was Rocky. Rocky came out in 1976 and was a tremendous success both financially and artistically. Won Academy Award for Best Picture. And United Artists was very anxious for us to make another Rocky. And we owned the copyright to Rocky with United Artists. And we said that we really weren't that interested in making another Rocky, which was not particularly true. We were interested in making another Rocky. But we wanted to make Raging Bull. And we kind of used the weight of Rocky to get Raging Bull made.
I guess they thought that we could pull it off to make yet another boxing film. I think when Marty suggested doing it in black and white, and then when they read the script, which had more than one curse word in it, at a time when people weren't quite used to that, some doubts did arrive.
There was a great deal of resistance about making this script. And Stephen Bach and David Fields, who were both heads of the studio at the time, who were going up to meet with Marty, Bob, and I to tell us that they weren't going to make the movie.
So they came up and they questioned us about the character, and I remember that, I don't know who said it, but somebody said something negative about the LaMotta character being something like a cockroach, and De Niro said he's not a cockroach.
There were negative things about him, but at the same time, I'm curious about people like that who have this negative perception about them. And really, life is much more complex.
I guess the sincerity or the conviction that De Niro had when he said that seemed to convince them of whatever. I don't know. Also that they were concerned the film was going to be made in black and white, and I pointed out there were 5 films being made in color that year: Rocky II, Matilda, the boxing kangaroo, and the main event, and one other boxing picture was coming out. And they were all in color, and I said this would be different. And so they bought that. But it was a different period. It was a different time. The directors had a lot of power, especially in a combination where, you work with a certain actor all the time, and it was a special team. So in any event, that sort of thing that ultimately got the picture made. Well, the casting was done by Sis Corman. And basically, if there's a lead in the picture, I usually have the actor in the room with the person as they come to read or meet very often, because I like to see the two together. I like to see if they have any chemistry together. Maybe it's hard to tell when an actor coming into reading cold or just having a day to prepare for something. But something happens, and people have got to be working together. My thing is, ultimately, it's got to be with the actors. There's got to be the faces on the screen and the way they interact. I want everybody to fit. If they don't fit, then to keep them apart until they're in the scene so that they can play their animosity. In any event, we just basically went through that process.
Tell me the truth. I just told you the truth. I tell you the truth the first time. You don't have to ask me again. I never do that. I always tell you the truth. If I did it, you would know.
Well, Joe, I had seen in a movie called The Death Collector, and he immediately struck me. I said, Marty, you got to see this guy. These movies. So Sis Corman found Joe. He was living in the Bronx and working in this restaurant, and people he knew. So we went up there one night for dinner and had dinner with him and went through the whole thing. And then Joe came and read a couple of times, and we felt that Joe was so interesting for the part and so terrific, that he was just too special to not use him.
I had no career. I had given up on acting. I was a child actor since 5, so even though I had given up on acting and didn't want anything to do with it anymore, the prospect of doing a movie with those two was exciting to me.
We liked his manner and his sense of being comfortable.
Do me a favor, huh? Do something for me. Just put your hands up. I want to show you something. Put your hands up. What the fuck is so hard about that?
Hey, Joe, you don't understand.
When I met the real Joey, it was very funny because he was looking at me from head to toe and walking around me. And I remember saying to him, well, they tried to get Robert Redford to play you, but he was busy, so I'm playing you.
You crazy. You hit her with a bat, huh?
She's still my wife.
Yeah, but how much abuse you want to take?
I hit her enough. What am I supposed to do?
Tell the fuck.
Well, the way he looked and the way he walked and all, I made a lot of those choices myself when I met him, and I always give my characters a walk, a way of talking, a way of walking. I always do that because it helps me get into a character better than using too much of myself, because I tend to bring myself into a lot of roles.
You know what you should do? Try a little more fucking, a little less eating. You won't have troubles upstairs in your bedroom, and you won't pick it out on me and everybody else.
And then we were looking for Vicky, and Joe said he knew a couple of kids, and one day he brought up Kathy Moriarty.
Joe recommended her. Joe said, I know this girl who's up in the Bronx or in some club. I see her around, and he found her, and he recommended that we meet her, so we did.
Didn't really know very much about professional acting. I just knew about high school acting and dinner theater, and just a little bit I had learned. I wanted to go to acting school, so I was working and trying to save up enough money to go. But Joe Pesci, or one of Joe Pesci's friends, had seen my picture and said, they're doing these open casting calls, which I was looking into to begin with, and I sent my picture in, and Sis Corman had called me. I went in and I read for Sis, and I went over them a couple of times, and then she'd give me another scene to read. And then she said, I want you to meet Bobby and Marty, two gentlemen. And I said, yeah, okay.
I knew she was young, but you couldn't say she looks like a young kid. I mean, she had a composure, which I didn't know was either total confidence or complete panic that she was covering. In either case, it's good. So, because if it was panic, it could fool me.
I feel like I'm a prisoner. I can't walk. I look at somebody the wrong way, I get smacked.
She read a few lines, said a few things, sounded right. The voice was very interesting, we thought.
Look, I am right. I'm tired of having to turn around and having both of you up my ass all the time.
Well, she was great because she was young. She had a great presence, good instincts, authentic, and that was a very important part of the whole thing.
Ultimately, we did a screen test. We decided to actually do a real screen test in 35 millimeter.
I didn't know the technical aspect of movie making. And all these people were around. And I remember Marty saying to me, "Okay, Kathy, you ready?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, action." And I kind of looked around and, "Kathy, you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm just waiting for everybody to leave." And Marty kind of went paler than he already is. And he said, "Well, Kathy, they're not leaving." And I said, "Oh, well, then why didn't you just tell me that?" I said, "All right, I'm ready." And that was it.
And then Bob threw a few improvisatory remarks to her, and she just wasn't shaken by them at all. In fact, slapped him right back, in a sense, with the dialogue. You know, just did it. Because she understood intrinsically what his character's like. She just knew it. And so once she finished the test, we kind of knew. We didn't even have to screen it. We kind of knew that's the area we wanted to go. There was another wonderful young actress who was coming at the same time to audition, and when she arrived, he said, "I don't even want to put you through it."
And they called me the next day, and they said, "You have the part." I said, "Okay."
Hi, Joey. How you doing? All
right, what are you doing?
Not too much. What are you doing?
There you go. I couldn't do research on the part of Vicky LaMotta because I would probably try and portray her feelings, which that wasn't what the movie was about. It was how he saw her, what he believed. So I couldn't meet her, which was a difficult thing for me to understand, being my first movie, not having a lot of experience, not having really any experience. So I can't really do research on the person other than Robert De Niro would be showing me the pictures and home movies, how she would walk, you know, just certain characteristics about her without meeting her. I probably understood it many years later that it was for my own good. But scene by scene, we'd kind of dissect it and just work on it and improvise. They taught me how to improvise. They taught me how to listen. They taught me how to listen and how to be part of the conversation. So it wasn't read your lines and what was in the script, but to become that character, know the other character so that you could always respond.
You make me laugh. You think it's easy? Why don't you talk to him? You know what to say. Tell him.
You know I can't talk to him.
Well, why can't you talk to him?
Because you don't like me.
Yeah, nobody likes you. You ought to be used to it.
Joe found Frank Vincent. Joe was an old friend of Frank Vincent's. They would perform at weddings, apparently, in the 70s, and they would sing, and they had to sort of act together. It was pretty interesting. And so they also had a great rapport.
Joe was a musician who was playing in clubs, different bands. I met him because I was playing in a club that was in his locale, and one of the members that I had, my band was leaving, and I needed a replacement, and I asked Joe if he wanted to work, and he said yeah. And that was 4th of July, 1969. And by Labor Day, we were partners. We just clicked, and it just took right off.
Oh, stop it! Suck your fucking eyes out!
I had done one independent film before Raging Bull, because I wasn't, you know, an actor that was trying to pursue that. But I met Joe in someplace socially. He said, you know, he said, look, I can't find a salva. You ought to come up and see them. So we set it up, and I went, and then I had an audition, and Joe came. And Joe and I walked through the scene where we're walking in the street, and we just improvised the whole scene. And 3 days later, I got a call for a screen test. I did the screen test, and I went away. I was going from San Diego to Vegas. And I called Sis Corman from the desert. She said, you got the job.
I'll see you later, Joey.
We were criticized, too, by some friends of mine who were actors, said, you know, it's a bad thing to do, bring non-actors into films because these are parts that can be done by actors, and you're hurting us by taking away work and that sort of thing, and who knows what they're going to do in the future. You know, it's just the way I saw things, and I was sorry about that people felt that way, but I didn't see it that way, and neither did Bob. And so that's how it developed. When I was preparing for the picture, Jay Cox and Walter Bernstein and Brian De Palma. Walter Bernstein actually took us to Madison Square Garden the first time. We sat all the way up in the seats, way up. And he said basically it's a series of 5 fights that night. And Walter was sort of talking me through the fights as what was happening. And it was very hard to tell what was happening. And then I realized I don't know how to shoot 2 guys in a boxing ring. I just don't know how to shoot it. And then Brian De Palma looked at me at one point and he said, Good luck. But I did come up with an image that I saw. One young kid was in the corner. There was a sponge. They put in the water and they sponged his back, but it was bloody. There was blood in there. It was just blood going down his back. It was quite an image, I thought. And so that was one image. And then the second time I went to Madison Square Garden, Jake LaMotta took us. And we had third row seats. And it was a different experience. I could feel the fight there. I could feel the sense of the blows and how fast they were moving and the hits. It was different. And so one thing I did notice, there was like three fights at night. They took the first one out. As we're taking the first guy out, who lost, I think it was a knockdown. I'm looking at these ropes, and while the announcer's announcing, there's blood on the ropes that's just dripping. I said, gee, it's pretty interesting. Nobody's cleaning up. It's just what it is. There's going to be a lot of bloodshed, and that's the end. The most important thing about the look was the use of black and white. And before going to the island, Bob did some 8mm color footage of him in the gym working out. And we looked at him one night. We ran it in my apartment. We just ran on a white door. We just ran the 8mm footage. And Michael Powell, the great British director, was there. Michael, we become friends with him in the early 70s, and he came to visit us in New York. And one night he was there, and we were one evening running this little 8mm footage of sparring, De Niro sparring with one of the guys. And I said something not right. I'm not sure. I couldn't get my head around the imagery, but he said, Powell looked and said, the gloves are wrong, the color of the gloves. I said, you're right, they're bright red. Now, of course, at the period, I think the gloves were more oxblood or maroon in a way, but it suddenly hit me, the color. Ugh. I said, I love color movies. I'm obsessed with color, but when he said that the gloves are wrong, it hit me. And so that's when we decided, I said, let's make it black and white. And so that was a main part of the look of the picture.
I remember being asked, do you think we should shoot in black and white or color? And I said black and white without even a hesitation. And I remember Martin looked at Bob and he said, see, we all agree, we're right, it's right.
I was delighted to think about shooting in black and white. It was wonderful because I, and even Marty, who's younger than I, associate boxing with black and white because of the pictures that you saw in Life magazine and the old newsreels and the Friday night fights, which was a staple of television in the 40s and 50s, were of course all black and white.